both Mere Christianity and Screwtape Letters came out of World War II.
Okay.
But Screwtape Letters was early World War II, and it was a specific point for Lewis. He was listening to a 1940 radio speech by Hitler, and Lewis wrote to his brother about the disturbing power that this broadcast had had on his imagination and intellect. And he kept noting Hitler's unflinching and forceful delivery and how persuasive it was that he said, quote, "statements that I know to be untrue all but convince me at any rate for the moment."
Wow.
And this observation scared Lewis, but it also planted the idea for a novel as I guess it does for I don't know. It's he heard that and thought I should write a book about it. So he wanted to explore and expose the psychology of evil and temptation by viewing it from the perspective of the tempter. And so he did this satirically by revealing the tactics of temptation from the perspective of a senior demon named Screwtape to his nephew Wormwood. And this was published serially in The Guardian in 1942. And people were mistaken thinking this was actual advice by someone about temptation. And so they were concerned. They're like, don't read this C.S. Lewis guy. He's such a heretic.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right?
In 1944, a literary review journal in England called the Times Literary Supplement said of C.S. Lewis, "Mr. Lewis has a quite unique power of making theology attractive, exciting, and, one might almost say, an uproariously fascinating quest." Today on White Horse Inn, we are going to discuss the theology of C.S. Lewis and his numerous other writings besides the Chronicles of Narnia. And we are excited to do this with you today. And to do that, I am with my usual uproariously fascinating, friendly hosts, Mike Horton, Walter Strickland, and Justin Holcomb. I'm Bob Hiller, and we are once again delighted to have the equally uproariously fascinating C.S. Lewis aficionado, Sophia Holcomb, with us on the show again today. Sophia, it is a delight to have you back with us talking about C.S. Lewis.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, we're going to dive in right now. So we talked in our last episode kind of about the history of Lewis. We talked about the Chronicles of Narnia. But as I mentioned, he's written a lot of other stuff. So Sophia, let's talk about his nonfiction, and then we'll get to his fiction. How do you think we should approach his nonfiction work? And can you tell us kind of about the breadth of his nonfiction work?
First, to offer a approach for readers when they're encountering Lewis's nonfiction is to not skip the preface, because that is where Lewis sets out his goal for a book, and he gives a humble approach for how he's going to do it. And like you said in that review, as a quest. He describes his approach as a peer with his reader. He's not a professor. He's not teaching them about the subject. He's discovering it alongside them. So it's an immensely humble approach, and I think it's also less intimidating, although Lewis was brilliant and assumed we know so much more than we do in his books. He assumes we know French, Greek, Latin, all the things. But I think it's a very humble and generous, intellectually generous approach. And he had an immense breadth of subjects as well as the medium that he wrote them in. He wrote essays, epistolary novels, letters of spiritual wisdom, poetry. And I guess that wouldn't be nonfiction, but extreme breadth of mediums. But then the breadth of subjects, he covered some of his books, like a snapshot of his books is he wrote about miracles. He wrote Reflections on the Psalms, and he examined the different literary methods and how valuable that is to our reading of the Psalms in the Reflection on the Psalms. And then the Four Loves, he did a not linguistic study of the four words for love in Greek, philia, eros, storge, agape, but a Christian application of those words. So a listener should not expect a Greek lesson. It's the opposite of any of that. He wrote A Grief Observed, which was an autobiographical account after his wife's death that is striking to read, as this is the same author who wrote Mere Christianity. He holds faith and doubt in beautiful tension in that book. Surprised by Joy is his autobiography, his conversion narrative. Problem of Pain, he attempts to explain, not to solve, but to work out the problem of evil and suffering. The Abolition of Man, he talks about education. And in The Weight of Glory, he discusses, I think that book mainly focuses on ordinary Christianity.
Yes.
In
that's
various,
good way of saying it.
and metaphysics in different, he explores that in essay format. And then he also frequently addressed the same subjects over and over again. He comes back to moral relativism quite a bit, reason and morality. I don't mean those as two separate categories. I mean reason and morality together, and how we get to morality from reason. It's not just a herd instinct or a feeling, nice sentimental goodness, but like a real solid reality. In that same vein, he discusses metaphysics and epistemology quite a bit, but he does it in such a simple but not simplistic way. And then the final thing he really hones in on is the person and work of Jesus Christ and the centrality of that. He works it into almost every discussion, even if it's like you're talking about education. He doesn't necessarily explicitly mention Jesus, but he'll talk about something behind the morality that clearly points to Jesus, which is very interesting and very thoroughly converted of him to do.
Yeah. Our old pal, Dr. Rod Rosenblatt, used to say that Lewis, what made him so wonderful, you said simple but not simplistic. He could write an intelligible sentence. The thing is, you had to read it really slowly. So because he gets pretty deep with pretty simple sentences. Now, you mentioned his themes in his nonfiction work, but those same themes are driving a lot of his fiction work. So how do these two work together? How should we be approaching his fiction work as well?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The way that I've learned to approach it is in the Four Loves audio broadcast that Lewis did. Lewis is discussing the proper format for discourse about the different theological concepts. And when he addresses the idea of the fruition of God's love and humanity, when he gets to that topic, he says, a didactic work would not be the place for such a discussion. He, quote, says, I would need myths and symbols to do that.
That's interesting.
Wow.
So I think a lot of his fiction is the myths and symbols for discussing God's love and its fruition in humanity.
Okay.
And three of the most popular works of fiction are Space Trilogy, The Great Divorce, Until We Have Faces. So in the Space Trilogy, he's taking a polytheistic approach of the planets, each planet being governed by a god, and telling an essentially monotheistic story about redemption of these planets. It's really, it's interestingly subversive in the way he does it, but he sneaks past watchful dragons with these stories, and he sneaks Christianity into people's minds in a romantic way, with the true meaning of romanticism in that particular trilogy. And then in The Great Divorce, we talked about this a little bit in the last episode, but he offers a supposal of the reality of heaven, about how real heaven is, and what it would be like if people in hell were able to experience a bit of that realness. And this also kind of deals with dualism in that hell is not the antithesis of heaven. It's less real than heaven. And so, but he also discusses the fruition of God's love in that story as well. But no place does he do it more beautifully, or I think more clearly, than Until We Have Faces, which is he works Jesus into Greek mythology.
Yeah.
He does a retelling of the myth of Cupid and Psyche, but this time the son of the god of love is Eros. And if Aslan's Jesus, Eros is Jesus Until We Have Faces. And so I think he addresses the fruition of God's love. I think I said in a subversive way. I don't know that's completely correct, but he sneaks it past to make it palatable for people who don't think they need God's love.
Yeah, that's terrific. Yeah, that Till We Have Faces, is that the last full book he wrote?
Yes, that's a good point. It's the last piece of fiction he wrote. He would write other nonfiction afterwards, but that was the last piece of fiction. And I feel like it's the most complete as well.
Yeah, that's tremendous.
And did he wrote that one with joy, apparently?
Yes.
And is that, did he say that was his favorite one, or what?
He did say that and Paralandra. So
really?
One of the books from the Space Trilogy were the ones he liked the most. He doesn't necessarily say they're his best, but he liked those the most.
Those are his favorites of his own. Yeah,
right.
Paralandra, can you give a quick summary? What is the Space Trilogy kind of about? Yeah, just real overview of the story so people get an idea.
So the main character, Ransom, is kidnapped by two scientists and taken to Malacandra, or Mars, where Ransom's sort of an atheist, so he has no idea. He thinks he's going to die. He sees no way out, but he ends up meeting what are called Theoyarsa, which are like the archangels of these various planets. And as the story progresses into Paralandra, Ransom finds out he is the chosen one, and he is sent to be a ransom for the fallen planets. And it's quite a complex story as it works out, but he's an interesting figure because he's not exactly a Christ figure. He's a fallen human who ends up doing very Christological things with his life, but it's a science fiction space adventure without all the technology, if that's the easiest summary. And then the last book...
That's a great way of saying it, yeah.
Yeah, and then the last book, That Hideous Strength, deals with a lot of the ideas he talks about in the Abolition of Man, which is, this one doesn't take place in space, but it involves the gods of the various planets coming to Earth. So I would encourage people to read it because it's not an easy book to summarize or an easy trilogy to summarize. It's quite complex, but he deals with these, like I said, in a very simple but not simplistic way.
I think that's an excellent introduction to him. And if you are going to read The Abolition of Man, make sure you read That Hideous Strength alongside of it to help make sense of that book for you. Go ahead. Yeah.
I'd love to, one of my favorite writings of Lewis, in fact, is Abolition of Man. And isn't it there where he has it's all the technology? It basically anticipates the transhumanist movement.
Yeah, That Hideous Strength, you mean? Yeah.
That Hideous Strength, okay.
Right.
I get them confused. That is, one of the things that strikes me about that is how prescient he was about the way people think about technology. You can read that today right next to, anything going on in Silicon Valley.
For sure, yeah. I have a mentor. His name's Andrew Lazo, and he always talks about the reason Lewis is so, like you said, prescient and seems to know so much about our future is because he had one very important piece of furniture in his bedroom, which was a mirror. He was always looking at himself and his own human nature and then looking at the world in an honest way, but then doing it with the hope of the gospel, knowing that redemption happened and full redemption is coming. So I think that's the reason he seems so good at this. Not seems, but is.
All right, so then you've mentioned a lot of the books, but there's two that we really probably need to spend some time with that outside of the Chronicles of Narnia are probably his most significant writings. Nonfiction would be Mere Christianity, and then fiction, I think this is the one that kind of put him on the map, the Screwtape Letters. So can you give kind of the background of those books and tell us a little bit more about them?
Sure, so I'll start with Screwtape Letters. Both Mere Christianity and Screwtape Letters came out of World War II.
Okay.
But Screwtape Letters was early World War II, and it was a specific point for Lewis. He was listening to a 1940 radio speech by Hitler, and Lewis wrote to his brother about the disturbing power that this broadcast had on his imagination and intellect. And he kept noting Hitler's unflinching and forceful delivery and how persuasive it was that he said, quote, "statements that I know to be untrue all but convince me at any rate for the moment."
Wow.
And this observation scared Lewis, but it also planted the idea for a novel as I guess it does for I don't know. He heard that and thought I should write a book about it. So he wanted to explore and expose the psychology of evil and temptation by viewing it from the perspective of the tempter. And so he did this satirically by revealing the tactics of temptation from the perspective of a senior demon named Screwtape to his nephew Wormwood. And this was published serially in The Guardian in 1942. And people were mistaken thinking this was actual advice by someone about temptation. And so they were concerned. And they're like, don't read this C.S. Lewis guy. He's such a heretic.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Right? So it was written between July 1940 and April 1941, just to give a timestamp on it. And this was the book that made him famous in America. And he was on the cover of Time magazine. It's a drawing of him with a devil and angel on either shoulder. And this decidedly made him very unpopular in England, especially among his colleagues, because one, it's not the thing to publish outside your field. He was a literature professor. It's also not the thing to publish satirical theology, if that's just never a thing you should do.
So
according to
American
them.
of them. I mean,
I know, it's so American.
pandering
That's
to the
what they
dumb
said.
Americans.
Yeah, it was too simple, far too simplistic.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's an overstatement, but I find that funny, that the dichotomy of that. So that was Screwtape Letters. And then Mere Christianity also came about in World War II, as I said. And it came about because Lewis was approached by the BBC because they were so impressed with Problem of Pain and the popular level that he was able to explain these complex ideas to people that were not trained intellectually in the same way he was with logic and philosophy, but to do it in a very intellectually generous way. And so that he was asked in 1941 to offer spiritual guidance and reassurance to a nation reeling from the effects of the Blitz in London and the ongoing effects of World War II. And so despite, I mean, we talked about technology, despite not being a fan of the radio, Lewis saw this as an ability to, an opportunity to reach millions of people. But he talks about how he had to convince people of their need for redemption. So he started out by explaining sin, but he did so, if you read Mere Christianity, he does it in a very kind and gentle way, not in like a soft, like, you're so special, you're okay, but in a, no, you have a need for this. And he presented it so that people wanted to keep tuning in and listening. And he did it in a layman's view of Christianity. So he wasn't a trained theologian, but he did it so well.
Right.
And then these talks were, like I said, received with much enthusiasm. And so they were published in 3 stages until in 1952, a combined volume was requested called Mere Christianity, which we have today.
And, you know, the BBC lost the tapes.
Yes.
Like,
we
they
only have
lost
2.
the tapes.
That's
Criminal.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
That, and they used it for ammunition during the war.
Oh, my word.
Is that true? Oh, no.
Oh, unfortunately, yes.
So, Sophia, throughout our time together, both this episode and last, you've mentioned the fact that Lewis is not a trained theologian. But with Mere Christianity, the reason why the BBC approached him is, as you said, because he has the ability to communicate to an audience that is also not trained in theology. Do you think his lack of theological training made him in some way be able to relate to a broader audience that's also not theologically trained?
I think so, because in the preface to Reflection on the Psalms, he says sometimes when you're confused in a class, a peer might be able to clear up your confusion better than a professor would, because the professor, and it's not, there's not a problem with trained theologians or professors, obviously, but they have such an intricate understanding of that subject that they might sometimes, if they're not careful, confuse their student. And I think Lewis is saying, I'm right there with you. I'm trying to figure out the same thing. This matters to me in the way it matters to you. And that's of course not to hate on professional theologians, but I think that's how he saw himself, and that's why he was so successful.
One of the things that strikes me too is beauty, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Sophia. It seems like right to the very end, he goes back to the beginning of what he couldn't shake, even as an atheist, that these intimations of beauty. And one of the things that has really struck me is how a lot of apologetics today is true and good, but not very beautiful, especially in Protestant circles. You know, we really don't do as well trying to talk to people about beauty. I paraphrase, because I don't have the quote. Maybe you have it right on the tip of your tongue, but where he says, if you have these intimations of beauty and this drive toward beauty, it must exist. And that just strikes me like another one. You want to present the gospel in such a way that people would wish it were true, even if they couldn't believe it.
Yep.
Yeah, he did say when he was an atheist, he didn't believe in God, but he was very mad at God for not existing. And I think that
Oh my,
So solid.
that is awesome. That's the quote of the episode
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah, that I think that hits at what you're saying. And then he also said, if I find a desire in myself which nothing in this world can satisfy, that must mean I was made for another world.
That's the one.
So the aesthetic apologetics of there's beauty. What do we do with that?
There's also Till We Have Faces. This is one of my, I think this is Till We Have Faces, because I wrote it down after one of our conversations. It was when I was happiest that I longed the most. The sweetest thing in all my life has been the longing to find the place where all the beauty came from.
Wow.
Is that Till We Have Faces?
Oh yeah, that's
Okay.
that's Psyche.
That's okay. I thought that was because I have some quotes written down from my Sophia reading list.
That's a beautiful one.
All right, then. So let's talk some of these. I mean, we're kind of getting at it here. But if you guys had to recommend one nonfiction book to the listener, what's a nonfiction thing you think everybody should read from C.S. Lewis, or at least what's your favorite one? And we'll just kind of go around the horn here and see what you guys say.
So I'll just start because we've already said my favorite one. Mine was Screwtape Letters. I'm one of those Americans that helped make him famous. Well, not necessarily. I helped keep him famous because I was too young, or just born too late to make him famous originally. But yeah, so I think the insight I got from that book is exactly what he was shooting for. It made me more sober, mindful, and watchful of my adversary because he's prowling around like a roaring lion, ready to destroy me and devour me. And I never really thought about the subtle tactics that the adversary would use to just draw me into seduction. And hearing Wormwood being tutored in this way, it was so eye-opening for me. I think for me, the adversary sort of hides himself in a veneer of goodness, and then I sort of reach for it, take the bait, and get the hook is what I get. So, I just thought that the adversary would show up and like with horns and a pitchfork in my face and saying, "Oh, I'm the devil," But this book was so helpful to me. The subtlety of temptation and the subtlety of spiritual warfare, I think, is a great takeaway that I got from this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm with you on Screwtape being in the. For me, it's at the top, but the number one for me has to be The Weight of Glory.
Yeah, that's good.
It just opens up your mind to what no eye has seen or nor ear heard that God has prepared for those who love Him. Taking off from Paul's statement that this light and momentary affliction is nothing compared to the weight of glory that will be revealed in us. We have no idea what we will be. We will be beautiful. We will not only merge with beauty, we will be beautiful ourselves. And that isn't a lightness. That is, glory actually means heavy. And this is something heavy laid upon us, but like a crown and a robe rather than a cross and a crown of thorns.
Mike, what's the quote you use from that article, the mud pie quote?
Oh, yeah. We're like, it's not that our desires are too strong. But they're too weak. We're like children making mud pies in the slums when we could be having a holiday at the sea.
That's a quote that I've heard you say a number of times, and then I read The Weight of Glory, and it's like, wow, C.S. Lewis is ripping off Horton. How about this? That's really quite something there.
Love it.
Well, and that's great because, a lot of people think, okay, well, I have to, Christianity, this is, Nietzsche's critique of Christianity, but it's what you get on the street too. Christianity is a buzzkiller.
Yeah.
It's just don't have fun, don't desire anything. It just kills all desire and passion. But no, I love this paradox that it's actually weak-minded and slothful and fearful to be an atheist. It actually takes courage to believe in God. And it takes courage to follow God because, I don't really have to do anything different from who I am and what I think in order to just lay on my couch and dispute God's existence. And so I think I love his emphasis there that actually we have more desires than we're aware of, and we have more fulfillment of our desires in God, in Christ, than we can possibly imagine.
That's great. Sophia, I think I asked the question favors nonfiction. I meant non-Narnian. So anything is on the table here. Sophia, what is your favorite outside of the Chronicles?
My favorite is what I call my unorthodox on-ramp to reading Lewis. It's a Grief Observed. I read that in tandem with Mere Christianity. So I read Mere Christianity and blown away by his conviction of how true Christianity was. And then I read A Grief Observed and was simultaneously blown away by his doubt that he was feeling. And a lot of people read that and think Lewis lost his faith. But I read that as him holding doubt and faith not as opposites, and not doubt being the antithesis to faith, but intention, and that we're invited to ask questions. And that was the book that also set me on my Joy Davidman research and all of that. But that was when I was like, I should listen to this guy. He has important things to say. And I think he's thinking about Christianity in a way that I've been thinking about and thinking this is the wrong way to do it. But he's telling me it's okay to feel that way. And so, I just got on board after that.
Just to sort of continue on with the Grief Observed train, I was blown away by this little book. And my copy is 74 pages or so. When I was a young pastor and I was helping a family through a loss, at that point, I had both parents, I had all my grandparents, all my siblings, all my aunts and uncles that were all still living, all my cousins, first and second cousins. So I'd really never had to grapple with loss in that way. And when I read the book, I felt this tension, and I felt like as I was reading Lewis's words, I was kind of teetering on the cliff of him losing his faith. I mean, I was feeling it. I'm like, I was reading my notes in the margins just yesterday, preparing for our conversation today. And I was really worried if he was going to make it to the end. I thought the book was so short because he quit. But the reality is that that helped me tremendously as I was helping come alongside somebody who had lost somebody as a 22-year-old pastoral intern.
Good.
Mine is, mine. Well, it's funny because I remember when Sophia read till Grief Observed, because that was one of our first conversations where we really dove in, and she was like, "So I read that," and because the story I have with that was, I remember where I was when I read that book. I read Sheldon Van Auken's Severe Mercy and saw the story that was there, and then some of the letters from C.S. Lewis. And I was in a Barnes & Noble in Atlanta when I was doing my PhD there, and I read that book there, and then I just went and grabbed Grief Observed, and I sat there in the Barnes & Noble in the middle of the Starbucks in the Barnes & Noble or whatever it was, sobbing. And I remember a group of, there was like a group of women having a Bible study, and one of them came over and said, "We are so curious. What in the world are you reading that's causing you to sit here as a mid 20-year-old guy just sitting here crying in the middle of They didn't know that I'm a crier anyway, so I was like, that's not hard. But so it was fun hearing Sophia say that answer. To me, my favorite, and this is just really personal, is Till We Have Faces, because it's, I think, Sophia's favorite, and I like reading. I read again To Kill a Mockingbird when she was like, "I love reading this. Read it with me." So I read this one, and because it goes through belief, it goes through identity, desire, the unveiled self, and it's looking at according to nature. So I teach philosophy and apologetics at Reformed Theological Seminary, and it was just fun seeing him do this. And when I knew what he was doing, when Sophia kind of coached me through it, she didn't tell me what was happening, and so that one. And because it has a very kind of Bonhoeffer has this beautiful poem called "Who Am I?" The feel of like Augustine on love and affection with Bonhoeffer on "Who Am I?" just kind of converge for Till We Have Faces. So it's my new favorite, but that's also because I remember finishing it when I was on vacation and family vacation, and sat there and jumped in the pool with Sophia, and we went off to the edge of the pool, and I was like, "Okay, let's talk. Like, we got to unpack this a little bit."
So cool.
That's mine.
Those are all good answers. I think they're
However,
pretty good. I was thinking about this. I've really been wrestling with this question. For me, the answer is always the last thing I read by C.S. Lewis is my favorite thing that he wrote, because I remember I was reading Surprised by Joy once, and I got halfway through and I thought, this might be the one that I'm not that big of a fan of. And by the end, I'm like sitting on my kitchen floor, like, I can't believe how good that was. It was so great. The one that I think has been most formative for me and that I go back to a lot, two of them, The Four Loves. I think The Four Loves is such a useful and thoughtful book in thinking about love. That the chapter on friendship in general, but male friendship is, I think, something that's sorely lost in the world right now. And Lewis saw that and was able to speak into that in a pretty profound way. The line where this may not be Lewis, he may have taken this from Aristotle or something, but that friends stand shoulder to shoulder, but lovers stand face to face. And I use that with my premarital counseling. I say, you guys aren't friends anymore in the same way. You're friends. You're gonna be getting along. It's good. You should like the same things. But you now stand face to face, and you live self-sacrificially for each other. Whereas friends, they're united by a common cause, a common like, a common thing. And it develops into something far more profound and deep and beautiful. So I think The Four Loves is a really, really important book, and one I can't seem to get enough of. The audio of it, correct me on this, Sophia, it's not the book, is it?
Mm-mm. It's
what
Lewis
is it?
himself.
Yeah, and he's not reading the book. He's setting like the stage for it or something like that?
What happened was he was invited by one of the bishops from the Diocese of Central Florida.
Whoop, whoop.
There you go.
Oh, come on. All right.
Yeah.
That was an
You walked
alley.
right into that one.
Tell
I
the
did not
story
set
nice
this up
and
on
slow,
purpose.
Sophia.
Yeah. So I
Oh,
believe
man.
it was Lowett that asked him.
Loudit, yeah. I think it was Bishop Loudit, the second bishop of the Diocese of Central Florida. Your dad being the fifth.
Right.
Who have you invited in that's interesting? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, no C.S. Lewis's, but I'm kidding. They're all fantastic. But he was asked to give a talk similar to the kinds he did on Mere Christianity. And Lewis said, okay, the 4 words in Greek for love. And so he recorded them in London, I believe, 4. And the one on Eros was censored in America because it was too
kidding.
scandalous
Are you
for his
serious?
American. It was.
Oh,
his,
wow.
his wife, Joy Davidman, actually has hilarious letters about this, writing to one of her friends, Chad Walsh, about how absurd. Like, Americans should be able to handle it.
The Episcopal Radio TV Foundation was horrified by this because it was scandalous.
That foundation has come a long way, huh?
Well, there we go.
Justin. Oh, that's outstanding.
Well,
So, all right. So now I want to ask this question. Some of the stuff we come across in Lewis, I think Lewis is probably perhaps the most important thinker of the 20th and really into the 21st century. He saw things coming that a lot of other people didn't see. Obviously, we love Lewis, but there are some things he says that are a little unorthodox. His views on the free will, I think a lot of us would take some issue with, or some of his views of creation are kind of controversial. How do we engage that stuff? How do we talk about those things in a manner that's respectful of Lewis, but also we kind of recognize there's some things we want to kind of not be on the same page with?
He was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't mean to like just jump on that, but yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah,
right? Like, it's okay for us to engage with people. I've just been seeing this more lately, where people are like, well, C.S. Lewis, you really shouldn't read him because of ... Yep. And it's like, we're not.
yeah.
Stop treating us like we're dumb. I mean, we should engage the thoughts of people, even that we might not see eye to eye with them on every single doctrine, on every single thing.
Including pagans. I love the line Calvin gives to the Anabaptists that it is pure superstition that disallows gleaning the truth even from the heathen authors.
That's great. Yeah.
Well, if that, I mean, good grief. If we can learn from Plato and Aristotle and Wittgenstein, and then certainly we can learn from one of our own brothers who never claimed to be a theologian and said a lot of things. A lot of his most controversial things, he either veiled or explicitly said, this is just, I'm throwing it out there, throwing it on the wall to see if it sticks. Is that fair, Sophia?
I think Yes, I think that's fair. And to what your point about pagans, he called himself a converted pagan living in a land of apostate Puritans. So I just want to throw that out there as a just to add on to your quote. Isn't that great?
That is great.
He could even thrive in the world of Twitter. I mean, like these are great one-liners.
They are.
Yeah, his Twitter would have been fantastic. But yes, I agree. I think he welcomed debate. And people think he was beat in a debate by Elizabeth Anscombe, and everyone's like, he was so embarrassed to be beaten by a woman in a debate. No, he welcomed that. He welcomed challenges. He rewrote part of his book after that debate. So I think if we do it in a respectful way, because he was a real person, if we don't hail him as a perfect man, we recognize he did a lot of good, but then we can disagree with him. I think that's the most respectful, because Lewis would hate if we were calling him God and that what he says is ultimate truth. I think he would respect us for respecting him in that way.
Does any of us have a hero we agree with on every page?
Absolutely not.
No.
Nope.
No.
Mm-mm.
And this was, when you asked the question, Bob, there years, may have been like 10, 15 years ago, there was a conference on C.S. Lewis by I don't know which one, but it was like a basically reformed organization, and they got flack for it. They're like, "What are you doing? He's an Arminian. Well, you can't." And he doesn't have the same exact doctrine of Scripture.
That's just fundamentalism.
Therefore, he's just they got criticized, and they're like, "Wait a second! Like, he's a brother who says a lot of great things that, because of his ministry, thousands of people might know about the gospel and be in heaven." So I love your question, because it's like, well, let's let him be wrong. And that Sophia regularly, she'll say, man, I think C.S. Lewis would be going crazy with the hagiography that is happening here. I mean,
I love Lewis conferences, but I always joke he'd be the first person to leave, because he'd be like, guys, tone it down. And that's not to say I don't love them, but
he had something, the Socratic Club. Mm-hmm. Does this sound familiar? Like, he had debates where he would bring in atheists.
Yeah.
And he would host these conversations with very differing viewpoints, and encourage that. And then I guess if I understand it correctly, he would stand up at the end and kind of tell you why the atheists are wrong. But nonetheless, he was still hosting. Like, you're going to get stronger and more thoughtful and more intelligent in your views if you're engaging opposition, and really. You have to understand, why is C.S. Lewis talking about free will? You can't just be like, well, that's Arminian. Like, you can't just label it. You've got to actually engage his thought process on it and where he's coming from.
Well, and don't you have a tension in Lewis? On the one hand, there is this sort of, okay, that's the freedom of the will. And then at other times, like the Hound of Heaven, I felt something pulling on the other end. I couldn't say no. I found myself overwhelmed, overtaken by the beauty. Isn't it true that, I mean, once again, first of all, he was in the Church of England, and to hold views as close to the Reformation as he held was itself not something in his day that would have been quite popular. Mm-hmm. So putting him in this context, can't we say, well, he's a layman wrestling with these issues and never claimed to have a sort of systematic theology.
And even his conversion story has a little bit of that. Like, he showed up and he didn't reason his way into this. It wasn't like there's his reason and his will weren't somehow less tainted by sin, and he kind of figured it out. It was very ordinary. He's in a sidecar, and all of a sudden he's like, I believe Jesus is the Son of God now. Like, how did this? I mean,
it was like waking up.
Waking up, like waking up, like almost sounds like regeneration imagery there.
He does a good job, though, too, with the whole concept of mere Christianity. And one of the great things that folks should probably read is his introduction to On the Incarnation by Athanasius. That introduction is just tremendous. But he talks in there about there'll probably come a time when we're looking back on Christianity and these different factions that are arguing, which have legitimate arguments, and he's not dismissing any of it. They have legitimate differences and arguments to have. But I think we sometimes forget just how much closer they are to each other than they want to perhaps admit in the throes of battle. And the point there not being like you can dismiss doctrinal differences, but the point being that Lewis could sit back and say, look, let's not eat our own here. We're fighting the same war. We've got to get to the incarnation, the dying and rising of Jesus Christ for our salvation. And not that these other doctrines are minute, and I don't want to get tagged for saying that, but I do think Lewis is going to be far more generous in his engagement and his thought, and so perhaps we owe him the same generosity as we read what he has to say.
Yeah, before we, I know we're talking about things where we disagree, but I want to come back at one. I need to fix something. It was the first bishop, Bishop Laudet. Falwell was the second bishop. So just you can send your personal tithe to the Diocese of Central Florida, Bob, to pay back as just an honorarium or a gift back to the diocese for the Four Loves if you wanted to do that. Or you can just send it to me. I'll be okay with that too.
Yeah, you got it. Mm-hmm.
Okay. But seriously, I want to encourage people to look at some of his essays too, because he does some really brilliant work. And this one is theology poetry, is in The Weight of Glory, the collected. And he has this line. This line changed. God used this line for me. I was going to go engineering, study mathematics, and this line, I believe in Christianity as I believe that the sun has risen, not only because I see it, but because by it I see everything else.
I love
that line made me want to study theology. I remember talking to my mom and dad, and they said, so you're not going to go do this math engineering thing? I said, no, I want to go to Bible college. And they were like, okay. I was like, they said, why? And I said, because I don't want to just study what the sun shows. I want to study the sun who makes everything seen. That's how I help process why was theology meaningful to me. And I want to encourage people also to go read The Seeing Eye. This is where he talks about how it was right when the Russian cosmonaut went up to space and said, I didn't see God up there. And I love C.S. Lewis is like, you idiot. Like, that's not how this works. It's like, just like Hamlet and Shakespeare, he says, if the only way he's ever going to meet Shakespeare is if Shakespeare writes himself into the play. In other words, Shakespeare created Hamlet. And if Hamlet's going to know anything about Shakespeare, Shakespeare's going to have to write himself in. And that's just a really beautiful, fun essay to read. So that's and that's where Dorothy Sayers, there's some stuff there on Dorothy Sayers and how she wrote herself into one of her novels for one of her characters that she wanted to go rescue. And there's a beautiful picture of incarnation there. But one last one, just for me, one of my favorite parts in all of Lewis comes from, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And it's right when Edmund had betrayed his siblings, goaded on by the White Witch for Turkish delight, which we talked about in the first episode, just kind of how silly it is. And when you were talking about it, Mike, I couldn't help but think about this. And the entire narrative is leading up to him just being this brat who's treasonous and he's silly and he sells out people for stupid things, which is exactly what it feels like when we sin. And it's almost like how ridiculous we are. And then Aslan goes off, the ruler of Narnia, who goes off to this sheepish Edmund off in the distance. And then he walks him back. He walks Edmund back to his family. And he says, here is your brother. And there's no need to talk to him about what is past.
Yeah.
Come on. Like,
that's good. That's gold.
That's a man who knows the freedom of forgiveness and the hope of the gospel. That's what people need to hear. That's what I need to hear. Here's your brother. There's no need to talk to him about what is past. It's taken care of.
That's the kind of command of the imagination that, for all his rational abilities, he wasn't a rationalist. He really does touch the heart. He wasn't trying to touch the heart. In fact, he said you can't go looking for happiness. You have to look for something else, and then you find happiness. But I guess for me, one of the most influential essays is in the collection God in the Dock, Myth Became Fact. And the first program we were talking about how he assimilates pagan myths to Christianity, not vice versa. How he not assimilates, but alludes to, brings in, and shows how, there's a little bit of that in Christianity, but a lot more where that came from. It's sort of like biblical prophecy. David is a forerunner of Christ, but then you realize he's a mess. He's obviously not the Messiah. Cyrus, and then you get all these people. Then finally, Cinderella comes and the slipper fits.
Yeah.
And that's how Lewis talks about the relationship between Christianity and mythology in that piece. It's historical. Myth became fact.
Sophia, you got an essay you want to recommend?
Oh, well, I love the seeing eye. There's one called, it might be Man versus Rabbit or Man and the Rabbit. And it deals with the dignity of humans and how God relates to humans and the being created in the image of God. You're not a rabbit. You're not an ostrich with your head in the sand. So it's like it's basically a call to action to pay attention to reality, but then to also realize that God pays attention to you in the sense that he cares about you far more than he cares about the sparrow. So I think it's a weird title. You don't expect it to be something like that, but at the end is so moving, and it's really short and pithy in the sense like it moves very quickly, but I think it's a really interesting exposition on being created in God's image.
That's good. I have not read that one. That will be this afternoon. That's what I'm going to go read. I like learning in a time of war. Just as a pastor, it's very easy to be blown by every wind that what's the big drama today? What do I have to address in the culture today? What's the big motion that everyone's worried about? But Lewis says, like, look, you've been given a particular vocation and a particular calling as a student to learn math. Like, it matters now as much as it matters outside of wartime. Like, you stay the course of the calling God has given you, basically. I think it's a really interesting essay. And the other one I really like is Christianity and Literature, where Lewis is invited to talk about Christian literature. And he's addressing this, and he's like, I'm not really sure like how I'm supposed to talk about quote unquote Christian literature. He's like, I think Christian literature can exist in the same sense in which Christian cookery might exist. It would be possible, it might be edifying to write a Christian cookery book. Such a book would exclude dishes whose preparation involves unnecessary human labor or animal suffering, and dishes excessively luxurious. That is to say, it's a choice of dishes would be Christian, but there could be nothing specifically Christian about the actual cooking of the dishes included, because boiling an egg is the same process whether you're a Christian or a pagan. I really like that line. It's one of my favorite lines. Listen,
I'd like to add an addendum to what I said about it's man or rabbit, and a better summary might be to say it's about becoming fully human and the goodness of that. I just want to make sure I clarify that for listeners.
Sophia, where's the essay located?
God in the Dock. It's in a lot of collections. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where the question is not, can I be good without Christianity, but is Christianity true? Right. We were made to know and enjoy God. So settling for nice is like a rabbit who is safe, small, and satisfied with carrots, but not being truly human. It's like,
that's good.
Kind of like what you said about being satisfied with mud pies instead of the holiday at the sea.
Yeah.
It's all over it. Yeah.
Well, friends, if nothing else, I hope these last two episodes of the year have whet your appetite to dive into some C.S. Lewis. Sophia, this has been some of the most fun we've had on White Horse. This is great. Thank you so much
Thank you for
being
me.
a part of this.
And thank you so much for your research.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
It's my pleasure. I love this stuff. So it's very exciting to talk about it with people who know. So,
well, thank you for doing it. Listen, friends, if you're looking for a good book in the new year, you're setting up your reading goals, you good pietists, pick up some C.S. Lewis, all right? Revisit Narnia, work through a collection of his essays, wrestle through the abolition of man. I will warn you, reading it is not necessarily safe, but it is good. Happy New Year.